we're going to look at adding. When numbers are small, what I mean by numbers that are small, single-digit numbers, maybe even numbers up to 20 or 30, and you're just adding two of them, like let's say 27 plus 12, you should know that's 39. You shouldn't be resorting to pencil and paper for such easy additions. I know you might be tempted to, but there's a little problem with that. You might be able to do it really quickly and really accurately, but what you're doing is you are robbing yourself of the opportunity to develop your mental skills, your mental agility, and your mental agility is a real asset to you, so don't handicap yourself by robbing yourself of that opportunity. Do it mentally if you can. Don't resort to pencil and paper unless you have to. Now, when it comes to adding bigger numbers or more awkward numbers, such as decimals, then you need to know a good method, a written method for doing it. So I'm going to demonstrate that. Now, you don't necessarily need it, but I'm just going to demonstrate the techniques, the methods, if you like, of column addition. So let's start with whole numbers. Supposing you wish to find the total of 309 and 76. Now, you can probably do that in your head, and if I show you how, well, you'd say, oh, that's 370, and 9 and 6 is 15, so that's 370 plus 15, 385. So you don't actually need a written method for this. However, I'm going to use this question to show you the written method. Now, what I sometimes see, rarely, thankfully, is children writing it like this. Say 309 add 76 and nicely lined up, and obviously the answer is going to be wrong. If you don't know why the answer is going to be wrong, then you may make this mistake. And I don't want you to be making this mistake, so I'm going to show you why. You can probably explain it yourself. It's all to do with columns, place value, understanding our number system. What we have here is 9 ones or 9 units. We have no tens, and we have 3 hundreds. And in this number, 76, we have 6 ones and 7 tens and no hundreds. So if we want to add 309 to 76, we have to be mindful of the columns that the digits are in. What's happened here is that it's been adjusted or left aligned, which looks neat, but it's not correct, because what I did when I wrote it like this is I've lined up 300, so these are hundreds, with 7 tens. Now, if I add 3 hundreds to 7 tens, it actually makes 370. But 7 add 3 makes 10 doesn't relate to the true total, and therefore it doesn't relate to the actual value of these digits. So it's all to do with place value. So how do you make it work? Well, the answer is very simple. You have to add like to like, which means things which are similar. And in the context of column addition, it means you have to add hundreds to hundreds, tens to tens, and units to units. If you line it up any other way, you're going to get a wrong answer. And if you do get an occasional right answer, it's by pure fluke. It's not because your method was right. Your method is wrong. To add them correctly, you need to line them up so that units are lined up with units, tens with tens, hundreds with hundreds, etc. So now I will line them up differently. I will say 309 and 76. And I put the addition sign to remind myself which operation I'm performing. This is much better because now this is my units column, this is my tens column, and this is my hundreds column. Whereas previously, this was my tens and hundreds column, apparently, which is nonsense because it has to be one column or the other. It can't be both. Right. Now that we've laid it out with like columns aligned, we can add. And when you're doing it in writing, you start with the lowest value column, which is the one furthest on the right. Now that's different from when I did it mentally. I showed you how I did it mentally. When you do mental adding, what you do is you start at the highest value columns. So I started with the hundreds. Then I added the 10. So I said 370. Then I finished off with the units. I said 9 and 6, 15. So 370, add 15, 385. Mental methods, you focus on the most significant amounts, the bigger amounts, and then work your way down to the less significant amounts. But not so with column addition, i.e. the written method. What you do is start at the lowest value columns. And in this case, it's the ones column. So what we do is we say, add up the ones to see what's the total of the ones or units. 9 add 6, 15. Now 15 is 1, 10, and 5 ones or 5 units. So 9 and 6, 15. So I write the 5 units here, and the 110 I carry into the tens column, because apart from these 7 tens, I now have an extra 110. So I'll count it in with the tens. Now I have seen children sometimes write their carry down here. I don't recommend that. It's not logical. We now have an extra 10, and we should add it into the tens column in order to get the total to put here of tens. So it's more logical to put it at the top of the tens column. So the total of the tens, we've got 1 and 0 and 7, which is a total of 8 tens. And no carries this time. And in the hundreds, I've got the 3 and nothing. So I've got 3 hundreds. So the total comes to 385. Now, you actually had a choice of how you wrote it, and I don't just mean wrongly or correctly, but you could have written the 76 first. So you could have written 76 add 309 and then done the same addition, and you would get exactly the same answer. So it is equally correct to write it like this. So when you're adding, actually the order in which you add is not going to make a difference to the total, because 309 add 76 is going to be the same total as 76 add 309. That can help you sometimes because you don't necessarily have to write the numbers in the order that they're given. You can write them in an order that's more convenient to you. And sometimes you'll want to do that. So the principle of column addition is that when you write it, you write the digits in columns. You write the sign to remind yourself which operation you're doing. Then you put a line across before you put the total. You start with the least valuable column, which is the one furthest on the right. You get the total of that. If the total is more than 9, it means that you're going to write the units in that column and any carry at the top of the next column. And that is the principle of column addition. Now, you might think, oh, but those are whole numbers and it's easy. Well, actually, it's equally easy if we were adding decimals, or for that matter, a mix of decimals and whole numbers. So I'll take an example now where we are adding a mix of decimals and whole numbers and show you that actually it's exactly the same principle. So now let's get let's call that one example 1 and this one example 2. So let's suppose we have 5.7 add 389.02 add, let's say, 83. So here we have a decimal number with 1 decimal place and a decimal number with 2 decimal places, and we have a whole number. Now, there's nothing hard about this if you remember the rules. The key to it is to line up columns of equal value, columns which are alike. So here's a question for you. Some numbers have hundreds and some don't. Some numbers have tenths and some don't. Some have hundredths and some don't. So we don't write every column for every number. However, there is one particular column that exists in every written number. And for that reason, it's the most useful column for adding or for subtracting, because every number has it. Okay, you've had a second to think about it, so you probably know which one that is. It's the units column. Every number has a units column. Let's identify that, because identifying the units column is the key to getting to doing the layout correctly. 309, here it is. This is the digit that's in the units column. 76, here it is, the digit that's in the units column. 5.7, here it is, the digit that's in the units column. 389.02, the digit in the units column. 83, the digit in the units column. Now, every number has a digit in the units column. It might be naught, but it's written. So to help you, what you do is make sure that the units are in line with each other, and then everything else will line up correctly as well, as long as you don't go inserting extra digits or spaces which were not there. So don't go inserting any extra spaces or digits which were not there. Let's now line them up the way they should be lined up. 5.7. I'm just going to write them in the order they were given. You can write them in any order you want to, but let's just write 5.7 first. So 5.7. Then 389.02. Well, the 9 has to line up with the 5 because those are both units. And if you don't line the 9 up with the 5, you're making a mistake. 9 has to line up with 5. So the 9 has to go here. Now what I do is write the rest of this number around the 9. So the 8 will be the tens column, the 3 will be in the hundreds column. Then the decimal point obviously lines up with the decimal point. That's another clue, if you like, is if all the numbers have decimal points, that makes it very easy to line it up as well. Because what you do is, if you look at the buttons on my waistcoat, how they line up, you imagine those are the decimal points in the numbers. They have to line up one above the other. So just like this. Okay, so 389.0, which lines up with a 7 and a 2. Then 83. Well, the 3 is 3 units. So it has to line up with the 5 units and the 9 units. 5, 9, and now 3. And the 8 obviously goes in the tens column. So this is now correctly lined up. Now, it might not look it because it's not left adjusted and it's not right adjusted either. But that doesn't matter because we've lined up units with units, tens with tens, hundreds with hundreds, tenths with tenths, and hundredths with hundredths. So it is correctly lined up. Now, I also don't like the way it looks. So what you can do is put zeros in all the empty columns. So this has no hundredths. You could just put a 0 to show the empty hundredths column. Here, 83 is a whole number. And if I can put a 0 here, but if I do, I'm turning it into 830, which I don't want to do. I don't want to change the numbers. I just want to find the total of them. So before I put the 0 after a whole number, I need to put the decimal point as well. to show that that is still 8 tenths and 3 units, but now I'm showing that the tenths column is empty and the hundredths column is also empty. Now it looks nicer, it looks more squared off, and it could help you with your adding because it's easier to see what lines up with what. If you really wanted to, you could also do this, though I don't think it's really necessary. You could say that there are no tens and no hundreds and no hundreds in that number. You can do that if you wish to, but it's not necessary. So all these yellow zeros I've added in are not necessary, as long as your lining up is accurate. Now we come to adding. So the question is, where do we start? Well, it's the same thing that we did for the whole numbers. You start with the column that has the lowest value, i.e. the least valuable column, i.e. the one furthest on the right. Well, this time it's not the units. With whole numbers, of course, it'll always be the units. But when it comes to decimals, in this case, it comes to hundredths, but sometimes it might be the tenths, or it might go down to thousandths or millionths for that matter. In this case, it's the hundredths. We start with the furthest column on the right, the one that is the lowest value. And when we do, 2 and nothing is just 2. 7 and nothing is just 7. The decimal point stays in line to show us where the whole numbers end and the fractions begin. Very important, remember, like the buttons on my waistcoat. Then the units, 9 and 5, 14 and 3, 17. You don't necessarily add the digits in the order they're given. You add them in the way that's quickest and easiest and most accurate for you. So I would start with, I'm looking for numbers that add up to 10. I didn't see any, but then I start with the biggest one. So 9 and 5, 14 and 3, 17. 17 is a 7, and carry the 1 into the next column we've added a 10 into the next column. Then we add the tens, so 8 and 8, 16, and the 1 we carried, which makes 17 tens, which is a 7 in the tens and then a 1 in the hundreds. So from a total of 17, we write the 7 and carry the 1. Then we add up the hundreds. We've got 3 plus the 1 that I carried, making 4. So the answer, I make it 477.72. Now, when you do column addition, what you should also do, which I'm going to demonstrate now, is to have a rough idea how big the answer should be, so that you'll know if you've done something which you should not have. So I would recommend to you, just do a rough total. Not the exact total, 389 and 80. Well, let's say that's 390 and 80. That's going to be 470, roughly. We're just estimating. So 390 plus 80 is 470. 470 add about another 6. I'm just rounding it to a whole number. So it's going to be roughly 376. And it comes out to, it was 390 plus 80, that's 470, 476. And it comes out to actually 477.72. So it's actually really close. So we can be satisfied that we haven't done anything drastically wrong, because the answer, we've checked it by doing a rough calculation, an estimate if you like. So there we are. In summary, as I've shown you here, addition, column addition, is very simple. It requires you to identify the units columns, because that helps you to line up like with like, units with units, tens with tens, etc. It doesn't make any difference whether they're all whole numbers, they're all decimals, or there is a mixture of whole numbers and decimals. You still have to line up like with like. Once you've lined up like with like, put the addition symbol to remind yourself which operation you're performing, and then begin with the column furthest on the right, the least valuable column, whichever column that happens to be, and add. And the units you write, and the tens you carry to the top of the next column. If it's decimals, you make sure that the decimal point is in line in the answer with the decimal points in the given numbers, etc., until you reach the last column.